Hello and welcome to The Way Home, Crossnore Communities for Children's Facebook Live show, as well as our podcast. My name is Holly Kessler, and I'm the Senior Director of Community Relations at Crossnore. We are here every Tuesday afternoon talking with some of our staff or perhaps a community partner about the work that we do, the child welfare system, ways we're engaging our community, trauma-informed care, lots of different topics. If you miss our live show, you can always rewatch on Facebook or watch it on our YouTube channel. And on Fridays, the podcast comes out on our blog, which is at crossnore.org. So there are plenty of ways to watch our show each week and engage with us here at Crossnore. Today's guests are no stranger to our show. I hope you had the chance to listen to episode 7 about Crossnore's Center for Trauma Resilient Communities. And I am glad to have these guests back again today. David McCorkle, co-founder and senior faculty at the center, and Cynthia Copeland, who is an adjunct faculty at the NYU Steinhardt School, Department of Teaching and Learning, and also faculty at the center. So please help me welcome David and Cynthia back to the show this week. Hi, friends.
Hello.
Hi. Good morning.
So good to see you again.
Good to see y'all too. So glad to have you here today. And I love everybody's backgrounds. Y'all all look so colorful.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Colorful in New York.
Right. Colorful in New York.
Full of art.
Yeah. So David and Cynthia are part of the what we call the New York office of Crossnore and the Center for Trauma Resilient Communities. I'm sure lots of people didn't know we had a New York office, but we do. So we're excited that you guys are here. Let's start out with you guys introducing yourselves again, remind folks about who you are, the work that you do at the center, and then any kind of any little tidbits you want to share about your life. David, will you start us off?
Sure. I'm from North Carolina, excuse me, and all my roots are started there, including my career as an actor. I got all my training at in my little hometown of Burlington, and then at Catawba College in Salisbury, North Carolina. And I came to New York, and I was a Broadway actor for about 12 years.
Wow.
And a few other careers, and then I became a social worker, following in the footsteps of my North Carolina aunt, Annie Laurie Burton, and have been working, doing I like to call it God's work, to relieve suffering and to strengthen communities. And I will say, as part of who I am, is I'm a Christian. Feel like I'm part of a larger table of people of faith, Jewish brothers and sisters, Islamic brothers and sisters, Eastern brothers and sisters. But today I'll be talking unashamedly from the viewpoint of my life as a healer and helper, from churches, although certainly many experiences with Judaism and synagogues.
Right.
I think that's a good place to stop.
Yeah, well, that's great, David. Thank you. And Cynthia, how about introducing yourself?
Hi, all. I'm Cynthia Copeland, and I am an educator and public historian. I am engaged with trying to help emerging teachers and just learners in general, which to me is the entire population that I encounter. I try to engage them in thinking about deeply about issues that are of concern to us, about the social studies of the world, history of the world, intertwined within that because there's all of our intersectionalities within our daily existence. So how does faith and spirituality enter into the conversations of how we walk through the world each day? How do our interactions with people in general who don't look like us? What does diversity and inclusion really feel like and sound like? Which kind of speaks to this idea of faith, spirituality, and religion. I try to think about histories of the past, particularly of communities that have been marginalized and not necessarily welcomed at the table, And I try to get all people to engage in dialogue and conversation so that we have a better perspective of one another, understand that there are multiple perspectives to the things that we come to, the issues that we discuss, and try to come to a greater understanding and knowledge of who we are as people and how we're meant to be here on this earth, to lift each other up, to honor our dignity and our humanity.
Wow. Wow. That is terrific. Thank you both for telling us all about who you are and the things that you're both clearly passionate about. Cynthia, I've known you were a historian, but it just occurred to me while you were talking, I need to introduce my husband to you. He loves history. He's the one that no matter where we go, he reads every little placard on everything, you know? And I'm like,
Yay!
everything. So I need to bring him to New York and put the two of you together. I'm sure you'd have lots of history stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
Again, thank you guys for being here today. We really wanted to spend some time talking about trauma in faith-based spaces and how we can respond to that. So to start us off, David, would you just define trauma-informed care for us?
So I'll use the SAMHSA guidelines to talk about trauma-informed care. And I think it's called the 4 R's, which is realizing the amount of trauma in our communities, recognizing the people that it's helped, and resisting re-traumatization of people. And maybe the fourth one, if I don't think it's it, but it's a good one anyway, is to restore the after effects of trauma. So trauma care, informed care is awareness of the amount of trauma in our worlds and responding to it collectively and not hurting people in that process and giving them, restoring them through helping them to connect safely to community.
Okay, well, that is super helpful. Where do you think that we have the need for trauma-informed care? I think we hear that word a lot. It's become more known sort of in popular culture. And so where do we need trauma-informed care?
We need trauma-informed care everywhere. So we need people to be aware of it. And I think since we're talking about faith-based spaces, we especially need faith-based spaces to offer an awareness of that many of people who are in our houses of worship have had traumatic experiences. We can talk later about the incredible numbers, the amounts of people that have been exposed to trauma. And we'll also talk about collective trauma, and we'll talk about safety, safe church. So when people don't get help, they actually this study called the ACEs study shows that how exposure to stress, like the kind of stress that comes with trauma, affects not only our mental health or our capacity to connect socially, our capacity to learn in terms of Cynthia's work, but especially our physical health. We're more likely to die sooner, pretty grim, if we don't get help. The good news, if we get help, then we can turn everything around. Obviously, the earlier we get help. So that takes us back to access. If we're people who've been traumatized are probably not going to walk in the door of a mental health clinic or even a hospital. They've been physically injured during their traumatic experience. But if they're in a space where there's an awareness of trauma, they can be helped a lot. And at one point, SAMHSA actually realized that just in terms of our overall mental health, that access is a huge problem. And the whole stigma, going to a hospital and saying, there's something wrong with me, I can't sleep, or I have nightmares, I'm having trouble at my job. If people can get that kind of help in their community and feel destigmatized, that's the place to go, whether
Yeah.
it's mosque or a synagogue or a church.
Yeah.
So the church, and I'll just tell you about church since Winston-Salem. I'm seeing downtown Winston-Salem. What is it called? Church Street or Main Street with all those big churches on them?
Oh, well, I go to a church on Fifth Street, and there's several churches there on Fifth Street. So
Right.
there's lots of churches in Winston.
So all those churches are places where people can begin their healing journeys simply by people being aware and using some of the tools that faith-based spaces offer people.
Okay. So we really have kind of defined sort of two different things in this conversation. One is church being a safe place, a trauma-informed place for people to come, but we also know that sometimes churches cause trauma. So Cynthia, define church trauma for us. Like, how does that happen for folks that they go into a place that they think that it should be safe, and yet they end up being hurt in that place?
Yeah. It is unfortunate that people can experience religious trauma. Excuse me. And that comes with the, perhaps people already come in with this sense of suffering and this sense of being disconnected with people, places, and environments. And they come to these places that they identify as houses of worship where they can feel the sense of safety, where they can feel love, where they can hopefully find a place and connect with individuals and communities to help them heal. But unfortunately, we know that power dynamics often exist in all spaces where we are, and power dynamics within any institution, but particularly in religious institutions, can emerge. And where people come in thinking that religious institutions and religion and spirituality and the people who impart these ideals and the ideology and the theology of love and healing, sometimes they see those people as authorities for sure, but then those authorities can sometimes take great advantage of their power and their position. And so sometimes these spaces can become seen more as sort of toxic spaces because they're bringing in sort of these toxic religious systems, because we have notions and ideals and theology that comes from sources that supposedly reign from above, that people who have studied this work are there to help people to sort of experience good things. But within that, sometimes societal issues and all kinds of other values and all kinds of influences from the outside sort of get merged with the theology and the ways that we are supposed to sort of show only love and understanding and healing. But when you get these ideals that get sort of mushed up together, there can be some confusion, and people can feel threatened within those spaces. People can sense a space of violence and abuse and negligence because they're not necessarily hearing words of a love. They're not necessarily getting the supports that they are looking for. They can sometimes be maligned and admonished while they're in those spaces. And folks are supposedly in these vulnerable spaces looking for places of healing, where in fact, sometimes these houses of worship and religious spaces can ultimately become more of abusive spaces. They can become harmful to people. They can actually destroy people and make it very, very difficult for individuals who were seeking a better space, a better way, a place of healing. They lose their trust, and they become manipulated, and they become, due to these terrible experiences, they may extract themselves from those places and find it very hard to trust being in religious spaces.
And I think, it's not that we're trying to beat up on faith spaces. They're made of people, and people are infallible, and people make mistakes. But at the same time, we would like to think that our faith-based spaces would become and be safe places for people. So is it fair to say that if a church or any sort of faith-based space were to become trauma-informed, then they would not also be inflicting religious trauma on folks?
Oh my goodness, that would be ideal.
Yeah.
That's what we strive for. That's what we hope for. But as you say, we are flawed human beings, and we go in and out of spaces and feeling comfortable and feeling trustworthy and feeling trusted. But the hope is that the power of community, the power of really good people who are there for the true meanings, the true, we're enacted in the name of God, where we are trying our best to connect people, to understand that there's something greater than ourselves, and collectively we can do wonderful things, and we can sort of transcend all of the harms and the destruction that has been put upon people in different spaces. But there's always conflict, right? Wherever we are, there's always going to be this conflict and this give and take. And it really just, love really is the place where we always have to be. No matter what, love is what is to move us forward. It can be hard to get to those spaces of love because love requires forgiveness, love requires understanding, love requires fighting, right? Love can be sometimes a little bit violent, right? But the idea is to be restored and come out of that confusion and get rid of the shame that we all may have. Sometimes we're in these places of trauma because we are confused, because we have shame, because we're busy trying to blame everybody else for what is happening. And we have those deep rooted feelings of guilt. And we have, all kinds of outcomes, such as mood swings and not being attached to our feelings, and we just bring all of this confusion together, and so that can result in a really challenging place to be. Makes us restless, makes us have all kinds of anxieties. It makes us quick to anger, and I think that when we're in these safe spaces, building boundaries, building understandings, slowing it down, really getting in touch with our feelings, honoring God, listening to what Jesus Christ did in the case of Christianity, how this person, Jesus, was out in the world and didn't deny anyone access to anything, because you could be a bank robber, you could be a thief, you could be a prostitute. He talked to everybody. You could be a corrupt accountant. He brought everybody together, and there was just no judgment, right? So this idea of bringing in, meeting people where they are and trying so hard, and it is hard to not judge because that's what we do. We're in a judgy world.
Yes.
But, when we have people who can help us not judge, and we move sort of together, this is the hope. This is what we hope we can give to people in our religious and spiritual spaces, so that people can feel that they are one, that they are part of a family, and that their family just, extends and ripples out on a multitude of levels.
Yes, and when you said we are one, it just reminded me of being in a meeting last night that was a church meeting, and it was a conversation that could have had folks kind of on different sides of what we were discussing. And our pastor wisely reminded us all at the beginning of the discussion that we're all on the same side. And so even that very brief reminder, helped us to remember that we are all on the same side, and we all do want the best for our church. And so we can treat one another with kindness and love, and, in having this discussion. So that's just, kind of a simple, was a simple reminder to me that just to be kind and loving to people. David, when we're talking about faith spaces becoming safe, and how do we address trauma, or how do we become a trauma-informed faith space so that we are safe for folks to come in, whether they've had religious trauma or not? Maybe they've had some other type of trauma, but we need those spaces to be safe and trauma informed. So how do we make that happen?
Well, one of the things that we do in Cynthia's and my work, we taught there are several kinds of safety. There's physical safety, there's social safety, safe to be with other people, emotional safe for different kinds of feelings, and moral safety, taking the high ground.
Mm-hmm.
So churches in medieval times were, if you could hide in the church, they couldn't arrest you.
Right.
And we know even in our history that people who were fleeing from bondage and slavery would often be hidden in churches. And the underground, Cynthia's the historian here, but the Underground Railroad, even in New York City, the entrances and exits were often churches. There's a church not too far from where Cynthia lives and I live, at the Church of the Transfiguration, which was a stop on the Underground Railroad. So safety, it has to be safe church. If you teach, I'll just give you some concrete examples. Churches, synagogues, mosques, meditation spaces all need to train people in safety. And if you're a Sunday school teacher, and Cynthia's in my church, you have to take Safe Church, and you need to know, all about safety and excuse me, picking. Sorry, it's morning voice. Picking up, clues of when people actually need to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
So that's critical. And then I'm loath to mention this, but how can I not talk about this? That the places like churches and temples and synagogues and mosques were safe, but are no longer. Mm-hmm. And in our particular church, the church that Cynthia and I go to, we hired a security guard. Mm-hmm. And actually some people left because they thought that was offensive. But I was looking over the statistics. Now, we know that about the synagogue shootings, but I didn't realize there are so many. I counted, and this is just a quick look through Google, 22 church shootings in the last years, 22, where people came into churches and started shooting people. So so it has to be physically safe. And if we acknowledge trauma, and we need to know that any kind of violence is triggering for people because a lot of trauma happens in families, happens in homes, happens in school, happens on the playground, happens in the streets. So then you go to church and you don't feel safe. So it makes it more complicated in our time. I did want to tell you there's a couple of really good examples of trauma-informed churches. One is one in Roxbury Presbyterian Church in Massachusetts, and that's a program called Abiding in Community. Obviously, a play on the hymn "Abide with Me," and they have a program because they had so many shootings in their community. As we've had a good number of shootings in Winston-Salem. So they created a space on Thursday night called Abiding in Community, where people would gather to name, so that's the recognition piece, name their traumatic experiences. It was named after a woman's son who was killed. And they use some of the gifts of faith, like song and movement, and ushers to comfort people in distress. They do have a therapist, but they rarely have to use the therapist because there's so many tools within many faith contexts that are so healing, and people forget that they have access to those tools. Obviously, prayer, obviously, singing, humming, chanting, anointing. There are so many blessing. There's so many tools in churches. There's another good example is actually a guy named Sam Wells, who's an Episcopal priest, who's actually was the chaplain at Duke Chapel, is now in England, and he does a program called Being With, based on the Psalm, I will be with you, the 23rd Psalm, and the importance of not doing for people, but being with. And in terms of trauma fragments people. They feel ashamed and alone. And in the context of their family, people say that the worst part of trauma is isolation, and feeling like you're no longer a part of anything. Because trauma pulls people apart. And imagine if it happens in terms of a relationship, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's sexual abuse in the home. People need to come to a place where people can be with them. Now, this doesn't mean getting up all in their faces and saying, "What happened to you? Tell me the details," because that's not good.
Right.
There are stages, but to just recognize there's some really good books that have been written. One is the head of Union Theological Seminaries. Is it Serenity Jones, Cynthia?
Serene
Jones. She wrote a great book about healing from trauma in her own faith tradition, and helping people.
Yeah, those are great examples, and we'll have some of these links in the show notes. We are quickly running out of time, so I'm going to have you guys come back and let's talk about some more sort of specific areas. But to sum up a little bit, I think really what you guys have emphasized today is that we have to recognize that religious trauma happens, and that sometimes our churches and our faith-based spaces are not safe. And that one of the ways that we can start that is to address physical safety, first of all, and so that people feel physically safe to come in. And then there's some practices that we can start to institute that help to start address some of the other emotional safety, psychological safety, those kinds of things. And maybe when we have you guys come back, we can dive into that a little bit more. But just before we end, Cynthia, I did want to say congratulations to you. You just in the middle of November were awarded the Bishop's Cross by St. Mark's Church in the Bowery there in New York. And congratulations to you. And that was for a lot of this work that you do that we've been talking about today.
Thank you. Yes. Actually, so I got this award from the Episcopal Diocese of New York, which is the Diocese of New York that stretches from the Catskills to Staten Island in New York City or New York State. And it is an award that is given. It's the highest honor that is presented to individuals who have done outstanding work on behalf of the diocese, on behalf of their community. And it's a surprise. You never know that this is happening to you. Wow. And it happened at the annual convention where all of the folks get together to discuss church business and pass resolutions and think about the future. So there were about 300 people in this ballroom of a hotel, and I was called and had my ugly crying face across 4 screens for people to see just how amazing it was. And I had members of my church family, I had my immediate family from all over. They brought them in, and it was a complete surprise, and I am forever changed. It was just an amazing event. And it just shows you, I do the work just because I do the work. I don't expect to be, recognized or called out or anything. I just want to do the work. And so it was really lovely to receive that honor.
Well, that's excellent. And I'm so delighted that you have been recognized for so much of this work that you have done. And David and Cynthia, both thank you so much for being here. If there are faith spaces that are interested in learning more or, interested definitely in some actual training that the center can offer, please don't hesitate to check out the website. And again, we'll have some links in the show notes too for you to look at. So David and Cynthia, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely. Well, as I've thanked our guests for today, let me also say thanks to each of you who are watching or listening. We appreciate the opportunity to tell you about Crossnore, about the Center for Trauma Resilient Communities, and all of the work that we're doing in our communities. For more information, please visit our website at crossnore.org or follow us on our social media channels on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. That's it for today, but I hope you will join us again next week on The Way Home.